You just talking to mine.
Not Sean from Cisco.
So, if anyone's looking at the schedule, thank you.
Yes.
If anyone's looking at the schedule, it says that Sean Mueller is supposed to be up here, but he's not from Michigan, so I kicked his ass and took his badge, so he's not here. I'm going to take over his spot for him. So like the slide says, my name is Matt Hendrickson. I am with Cisco, and we are going to talk about software-defined segmentation with TrustSec here today. How many of you guys have heard of something called TrustSec? Anyone? Oh, a few people. Is anyone using it? Are those that have heard about it? No, not yet. Okay. Well, hopefully after this, that will change. So I'm going to build out some of the slides. All right. To start out, the reason why TrustSec exists is because the old way of doing things using IP ACLs and VLANs just doesn't work in today's environment, right? A lot of it is because we are mixing things like BYOD devices, Internet of Things devices, guests, employee-owned assets or managed assets. We're mixing all of those and we're putting them on one network, right? The problem with that is that a lot of those devices aren't managed by you guys, right? They're not managed by the companies that you guys work for. So how do you control those devices? You're mixing those in with devices that are managed, and that presents a challenge, right? Especially if we look at some of the high-profile, data theft cases that have hit the media lately. A lot of cases, in a lot of those, there are the initial systems that were compromised were not things that were managed by the company who was running those. So the other thing is complexity. How many people have an ACL with over 10,000 aces in it? 10,000 lines. I don't know if I can believe that. That those things tend to grow like mad, right? So the problem with ACLs is that they grow and grow and grow, and they never get replaced. Nobody ever goes through and prunes data out of those because that takes a lot of time. There's a lot of risk there, right? If you have if you remove a line that somebody needs, you're removing somebody's access, right? And that becomes a career-limiting move. Which means that managing all of those things is challenging, right? It is pretty difficult to manage that. So, getting into more of the traditional segmentation routes, and actually those guys at that table, I was talking to them outside earlier, and one of the guys had asked if segmentation meant using VLANs. And that is the old way of doing it, right? You would segment off your users into their own VLAN and assign them an IP range, and you would write an ACL based on the people in that IP range. But even that gets difficult to manage, right? Because you now have a lot of different VLANs for different user communities, right? And from a networking perspective, it takes a significant amount of resources to manage those. And then if you want people to talk between them, but you want to control that level of communication, you have to put a firewall or a router or something to filter, to route and filter that traffic, right? If you want to control access intra VLAN, forget about it. You can't do it. You have to segment again in order to be able to do that. So those are the primary reasons why TrustSec was created. So, what is TrustSec? And I was going to wear my Cisco badge, but I forgot to. But if you have a physical access badge, think of it like that, but for the networking realm, right? So it basically is an identifier that gets put into the Ethernet frame, and that identifier gets checked at every gate around the network. That could be a firewall. That could be an egress switch port. Typically, you assign them at the ingress and you filter at the egress, or at a firewall or router. But that's essentially what it is, right? So just like with my badge at Cisco, I can walk up to any door in a Cisco office and scan my badge, and if I have access, I get to go through. If I don't, the door doesn't unlock, right? The concept is the same with a security group tag. So basically you categorize your users, your devices, into these smaller groups, and you assign them a tag, right? And then you, in that tag, or in the policy engine for that tag, and I'll show you that shortly, you basically define a policy. And actually, it looks similar to the policy up here on the right side of the slide. Basically, you're saying, I'm going to permit traffic between any two groups or deny traffic between any two groups, and you can define what that protocol is. If you're familiar with writing ACLs, then that should look familiar, except for it's not based on IP. Okay, so how, I guess, what are the pieces of this? First off, you have the classification piece. That could either be statically defined, like in a data center. It could be dynamically classified by having a user log in when they join the network, whether that's from a wired, wireless, or through a VPN. Once you assign that security group tag, then whatever policy you've assigned to that security group tag gets applied to that user. So if you're, if you're, let's say you have a development server cluster in your data center, you can segment that server cluster to just allow people that should have access to the development server cluster. You can make it so that they're the only ones that have access to it, right? Anyone else in the environment would be denied if they tried to access those resources. So once you assign that classification, and I kind of jumped around the slide a little bit, you propagate that. So there's two ways to do it. There's inline tagging, where we actually put it in the Ethernet frame, or we have something that allows us to push that out over a layer 3 connection to devices around the network. Those could be firewalls. They could be switches, maybe across a WAN link or something like that. And then at those points, we have the ability to enforce the whatever policy we set. So let's take a look at how we commonly use security group tags in 3 different scenarios. We're going to look at a user to a data center, a campus and branch, and then a data center to data center, or inside of a data center. So the first one is user access to a data center. I'm going to flip through some of these. What this allows us to do is define what a user is allowed to get to, right, within a data center, and limit people to the resources that they need access, only the resources that they need access to do their job, right? This is beneficial for compliance reasons. For example, if you're PCI compliant, you have a PCI zone, we can limit access to that PCI zone to just those people that should have access to it. And anything else, any of the IoT devices, like the medical devices, the vending machines, the PCI terminals, none of those things can get to areas that they shouldn't be able to get to, and people that are not supposed to have access to it can get in there and talk to it. I mean, it physically limits a device's ability to communicate with a tag that it doesn't have access to, right? So one of the nice things here, when we get into the campus branch and segmentation piece, is that as we add additional sites, we don't have to modify ACLs around the environment. So we can say, and also a tag follows a user, right? So we can say, bill and accounting gets access to the accounting servers, and if bill and accounting goes to another location, another branch, then when he logs into the network, he still gets access to those servers, right? Even though he's on a different segment, maybe that segment through an ACL didn't have access to the accounting servers, because Bill logged in, he now has access from any IP address that he can get around the network. One of the other nice things is that as we bring up new sites, like I mentioned, we don't have to add those sites to ACLs. So what that does is it takes ACLs where you've got tens of thousands of rules and shrinks it down to more manageable ACLs where there are, potentially hundreds or tens of rules, right? Depending on the number of security group tags that we create inside of an environment. One thing that I should note here is that we don't have to have separate VLANs for each of these different groups, because we can tag and enforce in the same access layer device. So if we have a completely flat branch network, we can assign tags, and even from a layer 2 perspective, they would not be able to talk to each other if they weren't explicitly given access. So, as in this example, we've got the main building VLAN, and then we've got branch VLANs. Both of them are using a data VLAN. I think the VLAN itself is irrelevant, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So within the data center, it's a similar concept, except for we define who gets access, again, to what, right? This is statically assigned to the port. And what this allows us to do is audit who should be talking to who within a data center and limiting the communication. So if we go in and we say that the database servers should only talk to the web servers, right? Or the database should only talk to storage or middleware servers, but should never talk to web servers. We can enforce that policy by using the security group tags. Again, regardless of the network that they're actually on. Now, having gone through some or participated in some capture the flag contests before, the concept of land and pivot is critical to success if you're going to try to steal data, right? Nobody's looking at nobody is going to attempt to attack the device that everyone's looking at, right? The device that actually has the information that you want. Everyone attacks this other thing over here, like an HVAC system or a pop machine in a cafeteria or maybe a PCI terminal, because those typically aren't managed by the team that's managing the network and security at a specific company. So that makes those easy targets. And without segmentation, those because they have access to the network in many cases, because doing segmentation with VLANs and ACLs is really complex, most people avoid it. They don't do it, right? So they essentially just allow full network access, and that's when you are just asking for trouble. So that's how we would use it in a data center. So how do we get there? How do we get from doing ACLs and VLAN segmentation to actually implementing security group tags? One of the first things that you have to do is decide how you want that structure to look, right? That structure could be, as simple as a security group tag for my users, a security group tag for my guests, and a security group tag for every device that I don't manage, right? And with that alone, you can reduce the attack surface just tremendously. And I've got some slides that show that, those scenarios. But what you have to do is figure out who is supposed to be talking to who, right? You have to build a dependency map of who is supposed to be able to talk to who, so that you can write those policies. Obviously, if you start implementing security group tags and you don't know the resources that the user is supposed to have access to, it's difficult to write a policy that controls their access. So that's the first thing. Once you have that piece done, then you can start to chip away at the more advanced use cases, either maybe breaking up the employee security group tag into specific job function, right? Or look at using security group tags dynamically. because unlike changing a user's VLAN to put them into a quarantine, which doesn't work very well in wireless, because I have to drop the connection in order to get them to renegotiate an IP address, right? Not necessarily a problem. That's not a problem in wired as much, but it is a problem on wireless. Going through that requires the user to do something, right? Whether it's disconnect or and reconnect, but in short, it's not transparent to the user, right? So leveraging a security group tag, that allows me I can dynamically change that security group tag to affect their access without having to change anything about their connection to the network, right? They don't have to change their VLAN. They don't have to, renegotiate an IP address from DHCP. That's assuming it's not a static environment. Security group tags give me that flexibility. So those are all important concepts that you need to think about when you're moving to a software-defined segmentation policy. So what does it look like to be able to control these security group tags? So this is an example of a TrustSec policy matrix. You've got your sources along the left, and across the top you've got your destinations. Where those meet, you define what the level of access is. And that could be a permit all, a deny all, or you can define specific ports that you want to enable, right? So you can go in and you could tackle some really important use cases like user-to-user communication, how employees with the same tag communicate with each other. You can attack those really easily with this. Also with this, it gives you a graphical representation, right? So you can easily go through and see what traffic is allowed, what traffic is denied, and wherever you encounter a blue square or rectangle, that's where you have limited access. Now, one of the cool things is that you can make multiple of these TrustSec matrices. So you can literally predefine these ahead of time and implement these as various DEF CON levels. So a normal DEF CON level, you can say everyone can talk to everybody. But as you get start to pick up evidence of specific threats in your environment, you can tune those the matrices, the TrustSec matrices to implement certain security policies, and without having to figure out where you were coming from, right? What your starting policy was, because you can always go back to that. So think about WannaCry. I could have created a TrustSec matrix that says nobody can talk 445 to each other, right? And if you're and you can only talk to certain servers in the data center on port 445. I could push that out, and without having to worry about keeping track of those, I can back that out when I know the threat has been remediated, right? When I've patched all my systems, and I know I'm not dealing with an issue there. So the other thing is microsegmentation. So this is what I was describing about user-to-user communication within the same VLAN, right? If I'm using VLAN and ACLs to control access or provide segmentation, I can't stop that user-to-user communication, right, within the same network. So what the security group tags allow me to do, as long as I have the ability to provide enforcement at the access layer, so certain types of switches have the ability to do that. I can literally reduce the risk of malware spreading in my environment by controlling how my users talk to each other. So if I have, let's say I have an IM client and a soft phone installed on my machines, I can prevent people from talking port 20, 21, 22, 23, 80, 443, 53, all of the ports that typically are leveraged in an attack situation, and really reduce my risk surface right there, right? Because if somebody comes into my network and they're infected, they can't share it with anyone else, right? That's sitting on their layer 2 segment. Also, if a device is introduced in my network that I don't manage, that device's ability to pivot around my environment is greatly reduced, right? It can't look for other machines that it can also compromise. So even on the same layer 2 segment that it's sitting on. So I'm gonna go through this. So we talked about the kind of assigning a security group tag when somebody logs in, or statically assigning it on a port. And I mentioned that you can change that security group tag, and this is an example of that. So in this case here, we've got a user who downloaded a malicious PDF. Sorry, the PDF goes and spreads itself, maybe through email or something, to other users in that environment. Well, to best leverage a security group tag, I can detect through a sensor when that user comes in contact with something malicious, and when it does, I can basically place them in their own quarantine zone, right? And perform a change of authorization, which allows me to change the security group tag again without changing anything at the IP level, and I can basically keep them in their own little container so that malware or whatever that malicious event was, that can't spread, right? Taking a look at that in a slightly different context, if we have a user in the finance department, that user goes and is able to access resources with no problem. They can get to some IT servers. They can get limited access to the internet. They have access to cloud apps and the company intranet. As soon as I see something malicious, and that could be from another Cisco tool, a third party, any third party tool that connects up to a SIM to share its events, I can have that, either the SIM or any of the other Cisco tools, communicate back to the TrustSec engine and say, change this user's security group tag, right? And as soon as I do that, now I've prevented them from talking to the IT servers, from the intranet, from the cloud, maybe other people in the same segment. So that concept of a self-defending network that Cisco was talking about a long time ago, that actually exists with the use of segmentation, using TrustSec tags. So the concept of using like a signature-based engine like Snort or FireEye or anything else that's leveraging a known signature set to detect threats, that's one thing. But we can also combine this with something like a network behavioral anomaly detection tool. So something that wouldn't necessarily look at specific threats from a signature perspective, but anomalous behaviors, like going out and scanning the network, right? If I talk to if I'm a device on the network and I start scanning the network and I connect to a machine that I scanned on a port that I was scanning, and then that machine starts to scan the network and starts talking to a machine on a port that it had scanned, that's worm propagation, right? That type of activity without any kind of care as to what the worm is something that's suspicious, right? At any point in that process, I could have implemented a security group tag based on the information that a network anomaly detection tool was seeing. I could change a user's security group tag and stop that device from continuing to talk on the network. So, as soon as I change that security group tag, all of the policies for what that user can get are already defined in the environment. So it literally takes effect instantly, right? The ability to implement a policy is super quick. So the other thing that I want to get in is that this is an open technology. So this isn't something that's specific to Cisco. The technology for TrustSec it's an open standard now. Any vendor can support it. In fact, we've got a couple that already do. Checkpoint today and their firewalls can understand a security group tag, and you can write policy on a security group tag inside of a checkpoint firewall. Obviously, Cisco ASA is supported as well. We have the ability to carry these. How many people have heard of something called ACI? It's application-centric. Yeah. So so we can actually leverage ACI tags or security group tags in an ACI environment. So we can map a security group tag to an endpoint group in ACI, so that in case you didn't want to implement security group tags in your data center, because you want to have more of an application-centric approach to designing your data center, we can combine the two. So you can leverage security group tags in an ACI environment and leverage ACI endpoint group tags in a TrustSec environment. So I think I have 3 minutes. Are there any questions? Yeah. So let me repeat that back to you to make sure we got it. You were talking about the multiple TrustSec matrices. Is there any way to map that? Oh, absolutely. So actually, that is an important step in deploying TrustSec tags. You can apply TrustSec tags all day long, and if you don't filter anywhere, nobody ever knows that they're there, right? It's completely outside of what the user would be able to see. So because those tags are embedded in the frame, if you do inline tagging, any kind of traffic like NetFlow monitoring tools would be able to pick those tags up, and you could see who's communicating with who. So yeah, absolutely, you can assign security group tags to without actually implementing any filtering or enforcement, just to get visibility into who's talking to who. Yeah. One of the other nice things with that is that you can apply policy on systems that shouldn't talk to other systems in a passive manner, and then you can go through and kind of audit those, right? So you can show, like, if you're required to follow PCI, you can show your auditors that nobody outside of the people that are supposed to have access into the PCI environment have actually talked into the PCI environment since your previous audit. So, all right, guys. Well, thanks for your time.